Have you been standing on any clocks lately?
Of course, I'm standing on clocks. Last time I checked, I have 10 toes and not one is missing.
Speaking of toes, nothing beats a Jetsu holiday, and right now you can save 50 pounds per person. That's 200 pounds off for a family of four.
Okay, Hebe, you've got to move on from that before I make you pay the phantom tax.
What the skippity? I don't know if threats are very mindful, very demure, Valentina.
Fair enough, but riddle me this. If the child is T and the finna is gag, sis, I'm dead as a child.
That was a Sigma question.
Okay, enough of the parody.
You might be wondering, Hebe and Valentina, why this cringe fest? Let's circle back to that. Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Let's Circle Back. We are your hosts. I'm Hebe.
And I'm Valentina.
In today's episode, we're circling back to the foundation of culture and civilization language.
That's a pretty bold claim on a very broad topic, but more specifically, we're going to chat through our personal experiences with language learning, the proliferation of internet slang, and a little bit of the influence that queer and black communities have had on the youth's lexicon.
Wow, that was very professionally said.
Thank you. It's almost like this episode focuses on words.
As a reminder to all listeners, this podcast is not corporate affiliated and all views are our own. So, let's talk about language. This episode is really rooted in our own experiences with language. In fact, one of the reasons why Valentina and I bonded at work is the fact that we're both ESL.
You'd be surprised by how many people are actually unfamiliar with that term. In addition to English Sign Language, ESL actually also refers to English as second language speakers.
Do you want to introduce what you speak as a second language?
Sure. For the people who couldn't tell because of my flawless, amazing mastery of the English language, I'm actually Brazilian, so Brazilian Portuguese was my first language. English was my second language. I also speak a little bit of Mandarin, a little bit of Korean, and I want to learn Japanese.
Yeah. And for me, I think technically Chinese or Mandarin Chinese is my first language because apparently I acquired that during the critical period of language acquisition or whatever it is. English is my second language. But I always like to joke that I am not proficient in either because I can't use Mandarin Chinese in any professional or academic settings, but I also have a lot of grammatical issues when I speak English. So, zero fluency in either.
But 100% authentic Hebe.
Of course.
I don't have anything too crazy that happens when I try to speak English. I think I can get by 100% well as a fluent English speaker, but I prefer to use the metric system. So in high school, I did get kind of made fun of. Also, I use British spelling for a lot of my words, so that comes up every once in a while. I don't think it should matter, but sorry, I'm like a Celsius girl.
As you should be. For me, I usually am okay, but once in a while, I have like a brain fart where I don't know whether or not I should use is or are, like the plural form of a verb. But yeah. Oh, and sometimes I find myself having so much trouble pronouncing a word. Like in my head, I know exactly how it sounds like, but when it comes out my mouth, it sounds like something else, which is a bit annoying.
I get that. My least favorite word, and the one that I have to put so much effort into saying correctly, is developmental. I actually had to practice saying that word after the first time I tried to read it out loud because I could not make the sounds right.
Fair enough.
I think we're slaying.
Of course, slang all day, but we've also have experiences learning other languages as an adult. So maybe for English we learned it as a kid, but as an adult it's like a different story. And we kind of understand because of that experience how it's different to learn it via textbooks or classes versus the colloquial use. Certain slangs or sayings that might be native to one language, you can't really translate over to the other.
Yeah, I think a lot of English speakers don't realize this because they learn English as their primary language and it's all around them. But have you ever tried to explain things like fire or gas to a non native speaker? Like, how can something be fire and be good when fire is just like an element? Or my personal favorite, and pardon the cursing on the pod, how can you describe the difference between saying that's shit versus that's the shit to a non native speaker?
Not only is it hard to understand between speakers of different languages, there's also a layer of generational complexity. You oftentimes hear about, okay, the boomers are not understanding the Gen Zs. Well, us as Gen Zs, we don't really get Gen Alpha. And I think this in part has to do with how internet culture is reinventing language as at an accelerated speed. Like, don't get it wrong, slangs have always existed in different generations and communities, but the internet is definitely making this culture slightly different.
Yeah, there's a lot of very niche words or very niche ways to use words that are suddenly making it to mainstream communication and becoming something that just everyone gets to use. But something that I personally find so interesting is how slang even manages to find its way to other languages in other countries. So nothing is restricted to a specific country or community or language anymore.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I recently watched this BBC question mark YouTube video as research for this podcast. And I think they invited like two linguistic experts, and they were talking about how because of the internet, how easily you can talk to someone from the other side of the world. And I like to think of the reverse too. You're also seeing slangs or snippets from abroad making it onto the English or American side of TikTok, for example. I think my personal favorite recently has been Ni Hao Fine Shite, which brings the next point, which is language fluency or usage of slangs is so dependent on understanding the conversational settings, even the lore, like what generated that popular saying in the first place, oftentimes through social media.
Yeah, when we learn language in school, especially if you're learning a second or other language, you sit in a classroom and you go through a textbook and you memorize vocabulary, you learn the grammar, and you take tests to improve your comprehension. But that doesn't really always translate to natural conversation. Even English speakers should be able to recognize that when you're texting in English, you don't use proper grammar or even the full words most of the time. We have a lot of acronyms, we have shortened phrases, we have slang. In this episode, take a shot every time we say slang. Like, there are things that will not be taught in a classroom that you need to know if you want to have quote unquote fluency in any given language. On the other hand, there's a lot of weight behind the origin of slang, slurs, idioms.
This is very timely because the hottest TV show on everyone's mind right now is Love Island, and they have two contestants who were kicked off the show because they were caught saying slurs. And it generated like a whole cultural conversation on TikTok, comments of people saying why you can or can't use this word. But on a more lighthearted side, what's interesting about Gen Z slang, this is me using quotations because we talked about how Gen Z slang oftentimes come from other smaller niche communities. But when we're talking about Gen Z slangs, there's certain characteristics that is important to highlight. One is that it's grammatically incorrect. So, this is something I'm very guilty of doing, but it's when you take nouns and turn it into verbs. Or I think it's known as verbing. And a phrase that Valentina and I use very often is mathing. So if something is not adding up or something is wrong, we would say the math isn't mathing. I just know that our English teachers are ripping their hair out. It's related to another concept of word fluidity. So, taking the Gen Alpha slang skippity as an example, there is no set definition or a rule to use it. You can use it as almost like an adjective, but also just a random expression. Like, you know how we would say, yay, but instead you could say skibbity, but then it shows up in instances like skibbity Ohio, skibbity toilet.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Ohio is always negative. And I don't know how to explain what that means or how to use it. I feel like I'm just going off vibes. We could be completely wrong. I don't know if we have any Gen Alpha listeners, but hopefully they can reach out and educate us if we're wrong.
So, as you can see, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, or younger generation slang is really hard to learn systematically as you would with Japanese, Korean, etc., because it's so fluid, so dependent on what is the online dialogue and usage for it. Do we want to make a quick prediction for 2025 Oxford with word of the year?
Do you think it's gonna be skibbity or like bombshell?
Why do I think it's crash out? Because I feel like everyone's crashing out this
Oh,
year.
wait, I think you could be right.
But I think crash out has my vote as of right now. Lock in.
I'm gonna put my vote in there too. You convince me.
This is the year of crash out, guys.
We are very excited to talk about Vine. And you might be thinking, how does Vine relate to language? And if you're thinking that, buckle your seatbelt, we're about to tell you. Hebe called it the origin of evil. I think I said Vine kind of paved the way for TikTok because I would argue that it's the birth of very viral short form content. I know there were people watching like panda sneezes or cat playing piano on YouTube beforehand, but I don't think it was until Vine where you could just endlessly scroll through 6 second long loops.
I may also be wrong, but I think that was before the existence of algorithm. So the most popular vines would get watched by everyone. And then it becomes viral sound bites that everyone recognizes and to this day still quotes.
We have to give millennials the credit they're due because I think it was a lot of millennial creators on Vine that were popularizing these trends.
I think it's the first time where Gen Z developed a common lingo.
Oh, you could be right.
It's like a collective repertoire of different phrases and words that we know and can quote to each other. And we know Vine eventually uh, went away. A baddie has
Rest in
fallen.
peace.
Yeah. And
Diva
then
down.
Diva down. And in its place came TikTok, which also evolved Vine culture into something else because, on one hand, you have the passage of time. We're no longer the same age as we were when we consumed Vines. But also, TikTok added new abilities. TikTok had much advanced features than Vine. There's audio and music clips you can add on. You can find something to edit. You can do POV trends, which also involves a lot of editing, which made it slightly different from Vine, where Valentina described it's just 6 second short form videos where you're gonna snap in a moment of time. Whereas TikTok, you can plan and you don't have to have original thought because you could just borrow someone's audio and lay it over something else. In addition, TikTok had more of a community feel to it. I wasn't on Vine religiously because I was a kid and I don't think I was allowed to use social media, but I definitely do see compilations. On TikTok, one of my favorite things to do is to look at the comments. Sometimes the comment itself becomes more viral than the content.
My boyfriend was telling me about this. He recently saw a TikTok that went viral and he couldn't remember the TikTok, but he remembered the top comment because it was so funny in relation to the main TikTok that he was like, I really wish I could show you this, but I have no idea what the video said. I only remember the top comment.
But heads up to brands, sometimes it's not TikToks you should be scrolling through when you're doing, I guess, social listening, but also the comments itself, because you might find gems in those sections. And I think brands have been doing it because sometimes when you look at very popular TikToks, you have brand TikToks running to comment on it.
I think it builds a lot of, I don't know, brand equity with younger generations to see brands be part of the conversation.
And not the topic of conversation.
That's gold right there. I wish we could bold, underline, and italicize that line. We wanted to touch on the way Gen Z approaches irony, absurdity, exaggeration. Some might call it cynicism. A lot of the time, I'd say you hear things about how Gen Z uses humor as a coping mechanism or extreme language as a coping mechanism. But Hebe and I have a more nuanced take on that.
Something I use very often when I say I find something hilarious, and I think many Gen Zs do this, is I'm dead. And a very creative one that I saw that made my wig fly around the world, which I love. So, as you can see, we love using exaggeration to describe the emotional state we're in. But then you get this use of really dark emojis like the skull emoji, the cry emoji. And I think it has to do with the fact that one, it's a coping mechanism, and two, we're very desensitized to notions of death. And it has to do with the world that we kind of grew up in.
Not to get too serious again, but as you may all be aware, Gen Z is not only hyper aware of, but also overexposed to the world's many atrocities. Fortunately and unfortunately, we've had access to the internet for most of our conscious lives, and that means we can see everything that's going on all the time. We were born right after 9/11. We were technically around during the 2008 crisis. We just went through the COVID pandemic in 2020, 2021. And throughout all of that, we see almost every single war or conflict around the world that's just fueled by hate and has so much loss of human life. In our age group, there's a lot of drug abuse.
No, I think I've been in active shooter drills since elementary school, which is very dystopian if you think about it, because I don't think the rest of the world go through that. But I distinctively remember in high school we had a semi-serious drill, and then I was just playing cool math games in the classroom, like nothing is gonna happen. But yeah, I think those type of things permeate Gen Z language. Well, we digressed into a very serious and arguably very dark topic, but let us circle back to something we kind of opened up in the very beginning, which is how slangs oftentimes originate from subculture. So Valentina actually brought this up. Sports terminology become built in given phrases in English. Valentina, do you want to introduce it? I don't watch sports, unfortunately.
I'm not much of a sports girl either, but sports language is so normalized in English dialogue. Home base, strikeout, on target, finish line, starting line. What is it? I feel like square one might also be a sports term. Even if you're not a sports fan or you don't have sports imagery in mind when you say those things, they're now just regular common phrases that you can use in any situation and they probably make sense.
Okay, I would like to argue that sports terminology is slightly more common in corporate settings, but our personal favorite, and maybe a little bit more leaning towards Gen Z, is the video game terminology that we see becoming a part of this online TikTok dialogue. I'm sure main character or NPC has been popping up on everyone's feed. People are like, oh, I'm an NPC today, or I need to generate my main character energy. Something I like using is side questing whenever I get distracted.
I feel like one that I really like from this is Final Boss. So you say something is the XYZ final boss. Like Brain Rot final boss right now is 24 karat gold Dubai chocolate Labubu.
With a matcha and a Stanley.
Exactly, exactly. So, this type of video game and maybe tech terminology is becoming a lot more common. If you guys are interested in that at all, you might want to tune into the next episode. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
When we're talking about how subcultural language making it into the mainstream, we cannot not talk about, in a sense, linguistic appropriation of certain Black and queer communities, slangs that we mentioned before.
As a disclaimer, neither Hebe and I are part of these communities, so we can't exactly act or pretend that we are representatives for them. But we're both very online and we like to be educated on things. So we're aware that a lot of the terms that we use online or we see used online come from the Black and queer communities. They're not new terms, they're just newly mainstream, I guess you could say. A lot of terms that Gen Z loves to use, examples, slay, period, queen, work, come from Black drag queens and ballroom culture, where these terms were used as words of empowerment in the face of a lot of hateful rhetoric. But we did just want to acknowledge that African American vernacular English, gay culture, Black culture, all of these things kind of drive mainstream pop culture, and we are very aware of it.
I think when we mentioned this topic, the first creator that I thought of is the woman who said eyebrows on fleek on Vine. I believe I saw an article where companies made money off of that. I think they tagged on to the trend, did something with it, and then got monetary gain. But I don't believe that Black content creator got her share of either monetary compensation, royalty rights, or whatever, all the way up until perhaps she collabed with Fenty on an eyebrow line. Let me do a quick search on this. Yeah. So her name is Peaches Monroe. the woman who coined On Fleek is now endorsing, or at least in 2019, endorsing Fenty Brow. But I believe there's an article saying that she actually did not gain anything when that came out, but other companies profited off of that saying, even though she created it. And we know what happened this year with the rollback of DEI, also attack on LGBTQ plus rights. So I think there's a huge problem in the marketing slash brand world where we work in with linguistic appropriation. That is more than just, I'm going online and started using these words, which is also a problem in itself if you don't recognize its origin. But I think when it comes to business, there's a bigger issue there.
I really hope to see change as time passes because if you're going to benefit from the work of Black drag queens, then you better be supporting the drag queen community, you better be supporting the Black community, the gay community, etc., instead of just taking what you want and turning away, especially at times like these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That was a long segment. I almost feel like a professor, like an academic. I'm just kidding.
Hebe and I have other thoughts for brands that are a little bit less rooted in how to approach culture and appropriation. I think there's a few more, if you want to call it shallow or surface level tips that we managed to come up with from our perspectives.
I think one is rather than tagging onto trends, is there a way for you to become a trend itself? So before we talked about this idea of verbing. So you can see successful brands like Google. You don't say, I'm going to search on Google. You said, I'm just going to Google. Or Band-Aid, less of a verbing example, but Band-Aid is no longer a proper noun, but a word you coin anything that bandages your wound. Coca-Cola, in some cases, is now Coke, and Coke, this word, will encompass the whole cola category.
Another thing, which is like a multi step tip, is that it's about time everyone learned how to speak internet the right way. And I know that's way easier said than done. We literally just did a whole podcast episode about the difficulties and nuances of language. But here's a few like rapid fire things. You need to move fast. This is one of the biggest mistakes. And honestly, not to sound like someone who's 23 years old, but it's cringe to see brands come on a trend too late because things are so short lived. Our opening had the Justin Bieber standing on clocks quote, and that's outdated by now. Now, it's not outdated within our circle, but looking at social media on a whole, people have moved on already. If you're, I would say, 72 hours into a trend, you're probably already late. It's good to just go early or move on and try to find something else.
Another tip is to just get online, start scrolling. You have to create the content you consume. Something I like to do is to try and train an algorithm. So I open like I don't know, a burner account on TikTok and try my best to train it so that I can embody that person, the consumer's mindset. I think could be a really good strategy. But in the case of Gen Z, if you're not immersing yourself in the ridiculous, sickening algorithm of a young person, you will not sound like a young person in your content.
This week, I watched Hebe train her algorithm, and I'm pretty sure it took her one day to get exactly what she wanted. So, if you just put a little bit of effort into it, you can get to that social media understanding side. The last thing, you don't really want to sound like a Gen Z parody. I watched a movie, I think it was called You're Cordially Invited. It had Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell as the leads, but the Gen Z characters in that movie are caricatures. I get poking fun, but if everything feels forced and unrealistic, it's not going to resonate with your younger consumers.
I wrote the Emoji Movie. I personally have never seen it because it already looks bad from the movie poster. Oops, sorry, not sorry. But I think the online consensus is that it's not making the correct use of emojis for Gen Z. And if you know Gen Z, we use emoji in the wildest way possible. In fact, do you want to say the most obscure emoji you currently have?
I have the money flying away emoji and the scared emoji, the one that's like kind of blue on top that's like, uh. And guess what? Neither of those are used in their right context. The scared one is probably sarcastic.
I have the running emoji, so like someone running away. I would use it if I'm like running away from a problem or running to something, honestly. If I'm getting excited, I would use it. All that to say, I feel like content like the Emoji Movie lack authenticity, and I know authenticity is a very overused word, but it's almost like a millennial or someone older getting on the keyboard and be like, "How do you do, fellow kids?" Right? Going on Google and say something like, "How do I talk to my daughter? How do I talk to a 20-year-old?" And then the Google AI overview just generates random words without letting them know the context, the situation you would use it in. So it's more like a warning, but don't sound like a Gen Z parody.
And with that, we are bringing it to our favorite segment of the podcast. I'd argue this is our only recurring segment, actually, our weekly roundup.
Thank you, Valentina. One thing that I've been seeing on social media very recently is this sudden plethora of Makeup X food collabs. So Kylie Jenner and Van Leeuwen, Glossier and I believe Magnolia Bakery, Sydney Sweeney x Baskin Robbins x Laneige. I was walking home from work and I looked up and I'm like, why is Sydney Sweeney doing in front? What is she doing in front of Baskin Robbins? And then I went online and then I saw the Glossier and Kylie Jenner. Glad I'm like, what is going on? Is this a trend that we're seeing recently?
I mean, it's like that one girl said, I think she said at end of 2023 about 2024, but it's becoming even more obvious. Food is now a sign of opulence. And the fact that you can collaborate with food, use it in your advertisement, make it a part of your brand is a show of luxury.
This is a tangent, but I think you're right. Because if you look at Crumble Cookie or Levain in the city, what is it? It's like luxury cookies instead of going out and buy like Chip Ahoy or something.
And then, speaking of online voices, Time did just release their 100 influential digital voices list. It was really fun to see the variety of people and creators that they had on there. When I was going through it, I saw a lot of names that I recognized, and then I got exposed to new creators that I really liked. And I put it on here because I just want to let the record show that Hebe and I are gunning for a spot on the list. We're just cool girls who want to be influential digital voices. So, Time, if you happen to be listening, like, don't be shy, reach out. Our inbox is very empty.
And lastly, I just saw this right before recording, but it's the Duolingo X Luckin Coffee in Singapore. This is a really odd one because Duolingo is a digital brand. Obviously, they have the Duolingo owl and a mascot, but you can argue that their product is a digital product, whereas Luckin is a physical coffee chain. So I thought it was a really interesting and timely collab. As you know, Luckin Coffee recently opened 2 stores here in New York, and I think that's a big threat to Starbucks because in China, I think Luckin Coffee cornered Starbucks almost out of the market. I wouldn't say out of the market, but they definitely took big coffee share in China. And they're known for being a lot more affordable than Starbucks. What I find really interesting about this collab is one, it's a digital physical collab, but also I think this will do Duolingo very good, knowing their recent AI backlash. And I think the visuals for this collab, if you go on their Instagram, is very cutely done. So props to them. Oh, and they have new flavors. That's also a big one.
Okay, I know you said lastly, but we have to add it as a postscript. We haven't mentioned Cat's Eye yet. So Hebe and I both want to shout out the Cat's Eye and Monster High collaboration. And I just have to say, on a personal level, as a girl who grew up with the Monster High franchise, I'm ecstatic. And then from a more objective point of view, I think it's so beautiful that Monster High, which is a franchise that's supposed to teach young girls that differences are beautiful and can be accepted because, they're all quote unquote monsters, they collaborated with Cat's Eye, which is a group of very diverse young women that are really like paving the way for the modern girl group, I'd say. They kind of champion diversity, difference, inclusivity. They just released Mean Girls in their EP, which has a bunch of different lines about how you should like accept and forgive and feel empathy for different people, even when they're quote unquote mean girls. Just a super exciting collaboration to end the week.
Yeah, no, wait. Don't end the week yet. I would like to add, I think what's so good about Cat's Eye is they're so personable. If you're a Cat's Eye fan and you know that one live stream where Megan came out as bisexual, and not only so, she was like, guys, I also have psoriasis, or in her previous video clips where she's like, guys, I have pre-diabetes, I'm dyslexic. I think they're so personable, and maybe we can do a whole podcast on this topic of the power of relatability.
Long story short, Cat's Eye is awesome, doing amazing things, and Monster High is a great franchise. It's been a really good month so far for collaborations. I feel like summer's always really exciting. But with that, we're going to bring this episode to a wrap. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to yet another episode of Let's Circle Back. It's been really fun chatting about language. Please make sure to stay up to date with us on all our socials. Hebe has been really cooking on our Instagram. We are having a lot of fun with this, and it means a lot that people are still listening. So thank you so much. We'll hopefully see you in 2 weeks. We've been your hosts. I'm Valentina,
And I'm Hebe.
and
We'll
we'll
see
see
you
you
next
next
time.
time.